The snow came in sideways that evening, driving hard off the ridge and filling the narrow pass between the pines until the path itself disappeared. It had been coming since midday, first as a pale suggestion on the horizon, and then as a fact, relentless and indifferent, the kind of cold that did not ask permission before it entered the lungs. Sarah had known it was coming before the sky turned. She had watched the way the pines on the eastern slope bent slightly inward, as if sheltering something, and she had packed accordingly. An extra layer of oiled wool wound beneath her coat. Her boots resealed that morning with wax she kept in a tin near the door of the storage cabin. The tin was old, its label long since worn to nothing, and she had found it in the rear shelf of the station supply room behind a stack of crates that had not been moved in what she estimated was close to 3 years. No one had missed the wax. No one had missed most things she had found in that room, because no one else went in. It was not her assignment, technically. The storage inventory was a task that belonged to no one in particular, and so had fallen to her. She had been at the Ashevale border station for 2 years by then, assigned as a support Omega to a PAC territorial unit that did not, strictly speaking, require her support. They had tolerated her assignment the way border posts tolerate inconvenient weather, with silence and a certain ambient resentment that never quite clarified into anything she could address directly. She was human. That was the first thing. The second was that she was an Omega, and in the reckoning of the PAC hierarchy, those two facts together placed her somewhere below administrative necessity and above the suggestion box that no one used. She had learned not to make anything of it. She had learned, more precisely, to make everything of her work instead, which kept her out of conversations and inside the storage rooms and the records office and the narrow outbuilding where the equipment lived that no one else liked to service in the cold. She was 3 miles from the station when she heard them. She had been cutting back along the upper trail, the longer route, but better shielded from the wind, and she had stopped because the path had leveled into a shelf of flat rock that looked down into a small hollow below the tree line. The hollow was a natural windbreak, ringed with old spruce, and she had used it once before as a rest point. She had stopped because something in the sound of the storm changed, or did not change, but rather had something underneath it now that did not belong to the wind. She stood still on the ledge. Snow settled on her shoulders, on the crown of her wool cap, on the backs of her gloved hands where she had paused in the act of pulling her coat tighter. She listened. It came again. Thin, high, barely there. 2 voices, perhaps 3, trembling at a register that the wind nearly swallowed. She knew what the sound was before her mind had assembled the word for it, because there are some sounds the body recognizes before the intellect catches up, and this was one of them, the sound of very young things in the cold, past fear, and into the first stages of something worse. She was off the ledge and into the hollow before she had made any decision about it. The slope was loose under fresh snow, and she went down it quickly and without grace, catching herself once on a spruce trunk, leaving a streak of bark on the wool over her right shoulder. The hollow was deeper than it looked from above, and darker, and when she reached the bottom, she had to stop and let her eyes adjust. She almost stepped on them. There were 3, curled against each other, and against the roots of the largest spruce, pressed as far into the shelter of the trunk as they could manage. They were small, impossibly small for what they were. Wolf pups young enough that their eyes had only recently opened, their fur still carrying the dense softness of infancy, dark gray and silver white, and one of them almost entirely black. They were alive. They were very cold. The one that was almost entirely black lifted its head when she crouched down and looked at her with eyes that were still more blue than amber, and made no sound at all, because it did not have enough warmth left for sound. She did not hesitate. She opened her coat. The snow was still falling when she stood again, all three of them tucked against her chest and wrapped inside the oiled wool, and she pulled the coat closed over them and held it with both arms and turned back toward the station. 3 miles. The wind was against her now. She lowered her head and began to walk. They were not supposed to be there. She did not know, yet, whose they were or how they had come to be alone in a hollow in the middle of a storm, and she did not spend the walk wondering about it, because wondering about it would not make the walk shorter or the pups warmer. She walked. That was all there was to do. The weight of them against her chest was the kind of weight that is not heavy, but is very present, and by the time the lights of the station came through the trees, she was entirely warm on the inside, regardless of what the wind was doing to the outside, and the smallest one, the black one, had stopped trembling. She pushed through the door of the main building and stopped. The room was full. It was always quiet at this hour, a skeleton crew at most, but tonight every wolf in the station was present, and the silence they had been sitting in was a different kind of silence than the ordinary evening variety. There were 12 of them, and they were ranged around the room in the particular arrangement that meant something had happened, something that had not yet been spoken aloud, but that everyone already knew. She registered the set of their shoulders, the way no one was holding anything, the way several of them had their eyes on the fire without watching it. She understood before anyone spoke. The pups moved. She did not fully understand the sequence of events that followed, only that it compressed itself into a single moment in the way that significant things sometimes do, the room's silence breaking, not with noise but with a kind of seismic shift, 12 wolves going still, in a different way than they had been still before. She watched their heads come up. She watched their eyes fix on her coat, on the small movement visible there, and she watched the stillness become something else entirely, something that had a name she did not have access to, something that belonged to the pack and not to her, a word written in a language she could read the shape of without knowing the meaning. One of the wolves nearest the fire stood up from his chair very slowly. She recognized him. Devan, the senior tracker, who had a habit of not quite looking at her directly, and who had, at some point in her first month, stopped including her name on the duty roster entirely until she had quietly added it back in herself each week and never mentioned it to anyone. He stood up and he looked at her coat, and his face did something she had never seen it do. "Where?" he said, and did not finish the sentence. She told him the hollow, the upper trail, the shelf of flat rock. She used exact words, and no embellishment, and she watched him listen. Then she opened her coat. The room moved toward her, not quickly, not with urgency, in the careful, collective way of people who are afraid to want something too much. She held still. The pups, for their part, had warmed enough to become curious, and the black one had its small face raised toward the nearest wolf with an expression of cheerful inquiry entirely out of proportion with the drama of the room. Davin reached out and took the first one from her, and his hands, which she had seen move with complete ease around rifles and ropes and 100 varieties of difficult equipment, were shaking. They were found near the ridge, he said, to the room rather than to her. "We thought the storm had—" He stopped. He looked at her again, directly, this time. "You carried them." She had carried them 3 miles, in a sideways storm inside her coat, while the wind worked against her. She did not say this. It seemed redundant. "They were cold," she said. "They needed warming up." The room absorbed this. No one said anything. The pups were being passed from set of hands to set of hands with enormous gentleness, and the fire was built up suddenly by 2 wolves who moved to do it at the same moment without speaking, and someone brought a crate lined with an old blanket and set it near the warmth, and Sarah stepped back against the wall and let the room do what it needed to do. She was there for another hour, answering questions she could answer about the hollow and the position of the roots and the condition of the pups when she had found them. Then she went to the storage cabin and checked the supply inventory she had been meaning to finish since the morning. She did not expect anything to be different after that night. She was, by nature, a practical person, and practical people do not build structures on single evenings. But when she came back inside at midnight and found a tin mug of tea left outside, her door still warm, which meant someone had known almost exactly when she would return, she allowed herself a moment of stillness before she picked it up. She held it in both hands and said nothing and thought nothing in particular, and let the warmth come through the metal and into her palms. Then she went inside. There was work in the morning. The tea was there again the next evening, and the one after that. She did not know who left it. She did not ask. She understood, without needing it explained, that some things are given without being announced, and that receiving them quietly is the only appropriate response. The pups grew fast, the way young wolves do, and in the weeks that followed, they moved from the lined crate near the fire to a larger space partitioned in the corner of the main room, and then began the process of attaching themselves, with the total conviction of the very young, to whoever was nearest and willing. They were not discriminating, as a rule. They had the democratic affection of infants, and they distributed it among the station wolves with complete even-handedness. But the black one, Sarah had not named them, had not let herself, had a habit she could not account for, which was that it slept best when she was in the room, and whenever she came in from outside it would make its way to her with the determined, waddling progress of something that had identified a destination and committed fully to reaching it. She told herself this meant nothing. Pups in that stage attached to heat, to smell, to the simple regularity of a presence. She was a regular presence, that was all. She continued her work, the inventory, the equipment checks, the records office, where a filing system implemented apparently at random sometime in the distant past had been in a state of managed collapse for years, and which she had been quietly reorganizing since her third week at the station, one box at a time, because no one had asked her to, and no one had stopped her, and the work needed doing. It was in the records office, on a Tuesday in early January, that she first understood something had changed, not in the room, and not in herself, in the air around the station, which had a quality she could not name, but could feel the way you feel, a change in barometric pressure, not from the outside in, but from the somewhere inside you out. She was cross-referencing patrol logs when Davin came in. He did not knock, but he paused in the doorway, which was the nearest he had come to it. "There will be visitors," he said. She looked up from the logs. "When?" 3 days, maybe 4. She waited. Their sire was notified. She understood. Then, the quality in the air. She looked back at the logs. "I see," she said. "He will want to know the details of the recovery." He paused again. All of them. She absorbed this. She thought about the hollow, and the 3 miles, and the weight against her chest in the wind. She thought about being a human omega in a room full of pack wolves while their sire arrived and took stock of what he was looking at. "I can have a written account ready," she said, "if that would be easier." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "He will not want a written account." She nodded. She went back to the logs. He lingered, which was not something she had observed him do before. "Sarah," he said. She looked up again. He was not quite meeting her eyes, which was standard, but his expression was not standard. It was something closer to an apology than she had ever seen on his face. "He is not like other visitors," Davin said. She took that in. She weighed it against what she already knew about a man who would have pups small enough to have barely opened eyes, out near the ridge, during a storm. She weighed it against the particular quality in the air around the station, and the fact that 12 experienced wolves were rearranging themselves around an expectation they had not yet spoken. "Thank you for telling me," she said, and meant it. He left. She went back to the logs. She had 3 days to finish the cross-reference, and the work was its own answer to almost everything. The report, when she compiled it, was 12 pages. She had not intended 12 pages. But the patrol logs for the ridge sector had inconsistencies going back 18 months that bore directly on how 3 pups could have been isolated in a hollow during a severe storm, and she could not in good conscience submit a report about the recovery without also noting the context. She noted it with care, and with precision, and with the particular brand of thoroughness that came from having spent 2 years in a records office that no one else visited. She did not editorialize. She did not suggest blame. She simply wrote down what the logs said, and what the terrain said, and what the condition of the pups on recovery had told her, and she let the reader draw their own conclusions. She left it on the records desk the night before the visitors arrived and went to bed at her usual hour. She was awake before dawn, not because of anxiety, but because she was always awake before dawn. She dressed in her usual things, the grey wool, the boots, one wrist still faintly inked from where she had been marking supply crates the afternoon before. She went to the main building to check on the pups, which she did every morning, because the early morning check was part of the routine, and the routine was what she had. They were fine. The black one climbed her boot. She was still standing there, the pup attempting to scale the lacing with an enthusiasm that outpaced its competence, when she heard the vehicles outside. She did not move toward the window. She simply stood where she was, in the firelight, and the pup made another determined attempt at the lace, and she watched it without expression and thought that whatever came through the door in the next few minutes would be what it was, and there was no particular reason to arrange herself otherwise. The door opened. Cold came in first, the way it always did. Then he came in. She had expected large. She had not expected the particular way he occupied space, which was not aggressive but simply total, as if the room had always contained him and had only now been reminded of the fact. He was older in the manner of wolves who have lived long enough that age becomes a different thing than it is for humans, not a wearing down but a settling, a density. He filled the doorway and then came through it and stopped. His eyes went straight to the pups, to the pup at her boot, specifically. She watched him look at it. She watched something cross his face that was not one of the emotions she had words for, not grief, or relief or joy exactly, but something that lived in the same territory as all three without being any one of them. Then he looked at her. She did not look away. She had a long practice of meeting eyes that slid past her, and she was not in the habit of flinching toward the floor out of designated deference. She met his gaze with the particular steadiness she had developed over 2 years of being mostly invisible, which was different from boldness and different from defiance. It was simply the look of someone who had no reason to perform either smallness or significance, and who was, above all, tired of the effort of managing other people's comfort. He studied her for a moment. She let him. She did not know what he smelled when he looked at her. She was human, and the mechanisms of the bond were not things she felt in the same way. Wolves described them, but she had learned, in 2 years at a pack station, to notice what wolves did when the air changed, the almost imperceptible shift of attention, the turn of a head, the arrested breath, and she noticed it now, not in the others who had come in behind him and arranged themselves in the room, but in him. One still breath, a slight turn of the head, a pause that lasted, perhaps, 1.5 seconds longer than a pause should. He looked back at the pup, which had finally achieved purchase on the lacing and was engaged in the work of pulling it loose. "You're the one who found them," he said. His voice was low and carried, and had no particular color, not warm, not cold, simply there and deliberate. He was quiet for a moment. Then he crouched, in the way that large people crouch when they are choosing to make themselves smaller, and held out one hand near the floor and waited. then waddled toward it with the absolute conviction of something that does not yet understand risk. He caught it very gently when it reached him, turned it in his hands with the practiced care of someone who had held young things before, and inspected it, and said nothing for a long time. 3 miles, he said, finally. It was not a question. She had not told him that. She wondered who had. Yes, she said. In the storm. It was not especially. She stopped. It had been especially bad. She was not going to lie about it for the sake of modesty. Yes, she said again. He looked up at her. The pup was examining his thumb with tremendous focus. Sarah, he said. Her name, exact, with no prefix and no title. She had not told him that either. She waited. Information, which was to say she filed it against everything else she had assembled in the past 3 days, and allowed the completed picture to settle without reacting to it. Calder. The name was not unfamiliar. It was, in fact, a name she had encountered 3 times in the historical border records she had been reorganizing, once in a territorial survey from what appeared to be nearly 2 centuries ago. She had noted it then as an anomaly and moved on, because anomalies in old records were not uncommon, and her job was organization, not speculation. She understood now that it had not been an anomaly. He was watching her with an attention that was different from the attention she was accustomed to, the attention of someone who was looking at her, because he had chosen to look, not because she happened to be in the way of his line of sight. "You wrote the report," he said. "Yes." All 12 pages. She thought she heard something in his voice that was not quite humor, but was its nearest neighbor. "The logs had inconsistencies," she said. "I could not note the recovery without noting the context." "No," he said. "I imagine you couldn't." The pup made a bid for his collar. He redirected it, very gently, without looking away from her. "Will you walk me through the inconsistencies?" he asked. It was, she recognized, not precisely a question. "Now?" she asked. "If you're not occupied." She glanced at the pup on his lap, which had given up on the collar and was now attempting, with great seriousness, to bite his knuckle. "I'll get the logs," she said. They worked for 2 hours at the records table, and he was a better reader of patrol data than she had expected, which was to say he asked the kind of questions that moved the investigation forward, rather than the kind that required her to explain what she had said already explained. He understood the terrain, he understood the logs in context, which meant he had looked at maps before coming in, or had been looking at this region for longer than his arrival suggested. She showed him the gap in the coverage pattern, a 2-mile corridor that the patrol rotations consistently missed, not through malice, but through an error in the original assignment that had propagated through 18 months of rosters without anyone catching it. She had caught it. She had been going to note it in the records as a general observation, not addressed to anyone, and wait to see if it got addressed. "This is why they were isolated," he said. "Yes." He was quiet. He ran a finger along the map without touching it, following the corridor she had indicated. Who else has seen this? No one, she said. I identified it 2 days ago. He looked at her, and you included it in the report. It seemed relevant. He was quiet again for a moment. Then he said, It is relevant. It's also the kind of thing someone in your position might have left out, if they had wanted to avoid a difficult conversation. She considered that. I don't find the conversation difficult, she said. I find the gap difficult. He looked at her with an expression she had not encountered before. Not surprise. Not exactly. Something that was recalibrating. How long have you been at this station? He asked. 2 years. And before that? Border support roles. 4 postings. She named them. He listened without interruption. Always Omega support roles. Yes. He left that sitting. She did not fill the silence for him. He was a man who was clearly accustomed to silences that served him, and she had not spent 2 years learning the value of quiet composure, only to abandon it, because the person across the table had more status than she. I want to complete the terrain review. I can continue cross-referencing the logs while you do. He nodded once. It was a nod that meant something, she thought, though she was not yet entirely sure what. Don't go anywhere, he said. She thought that was a practical instruction about the review. Later, she would understand it was something else. Corinna came 2 days after Calder had arrived, and Sarah understood immediately that she was not a visitor in the same sense he was. She arrived with 2 wolves at her back, and a folder under her arm, and the specific self-possession of someone who had prepared for a conversation they expected to win. She was the regional coordinator for border assignments, the person who, technically, had the authority to reassign, review, or terminate any support role in the territory, and who had a long institutional habit of treating support omegas as a category of furniture, present, sometimes useful, invisible until they were in the way. Sarah had dealt with Corinna exactly once, at her second posting, where Corinna had arrived for a review visit, looked through Sarah without registering a human there, and departed having made 3 recommendations that affected everyone, except the support staff, who were presumably decorating the background of her report. Sarah had noted this and filed it and moved on. She registered Corinna's arrival from the records office window. She saw the folder. She went back to work. Calder was out on the terrain review, which Corinna had timed, whether by intent or by coincidence, Sarah could not say, though accuracy rather than charity suggested intent. Corinna came into the main building and spoke with Davin for 20 minutes, and Sarah could hear the particular register of an administrative conversation from 2 rooms away without hearing the words. Then Davin came to the records office. She wants to speak with you, he said. All right, Sarah said. She finished the entry she was on, capped the pen, and went through. Corinna looked at her the way she had looked at her at the second posting, not dismissively, but with a particular kind of efficiency, the look of someone sorting objects by category rather than examining them individually. She had a form in her hand that Sarah recognized as a role review document, which was the administrative mechanism by which a support position could be reclassified or terminated based on a utilization audit. She said, "I'm completing a review of support role placements across the northern border stations." "Of course," Sarah said. "Your position at Ashvale is classified as General Support Omega, unattached." Corinna looked at the form. "I'm finding it difficult to identify your primary function. I manage the station records and supply inventory, conduct equipment maintenance checks, and coordinate the administrative scheduling." Sarah's voice was level. Corinna made a note. "None of which are formally assigned to your role." "No, they were unassigned when I arrived." "Which suggests they may not be strictly necessary." Sarah looked at her with the same steadiness she had used with every pair of eyes that had tried to slide past her in 2 years. "The records were in significant disorder," she said. "The patrol logs had an 18-month coverage gap that contributed to the pup isolation event. I identified the gap 4 days ago." Something shifted in Corinna's expression. Not guilt, not worry, but a rapid repositioning. The look of someone who has discovered the ground is less solid than it appeared. "I haven't reviewed that finding," she said. "It's in the recovery report, page 4 through 7. Corinna did not have the report. Sarah could see she did not have it. She watched Corinna absorb this. "I would like to review the report," Corinna said. "Calder has the original. I have a copy." Several of the station wolves had found reasons to be present, which was not usual for this hour. Sarah did not look at them. "This review is standard procedure," Corinna said. "It's not directed at you personally." "I understand," Sarah said. "Standard procedure is reasonable. I have no objection to the review." Was, exactly. Not an enemy, not a supplicant, something that was not fitting the template it had been sorted into. "I'll complete it when I have the full report," Corinna said. "I'll get you the copy," Sarah said. She went to the records desk and retrieved the copy she had made 2 days ago. Having made it 2 days ago, not because she had anticipated this conversation, but because accurate records required copies, and she was thorough. She returned to the main room and handed it to Corinna, whose expression as she accepted it was not quite readable, which was a more honest response than Sarah usually received from people in administrative positions. Corinna took the copy and said she would review it and be in contact. She left. The station wolves who had found reasons to be present found reasons to remain present, and the quality of the room's silence was different than it had been before Corinna walked in. Something had settled, or had been decided, in that collective, wordless way that packs sometimes decided things. Davin, from across the room, looked at her directly. She went back to the records office. Calder returned from the terrain review in the late afternoon, and she heard him come in. She had become, without intending to, calibrated to the particular sounds of his presence, which was a useful thing to know about herself, because useful things she could work with, and heard the quality of the conversation that happened between him and Davin in low voices near the fire. She did not listen. She was not in the habit of managing information she had not been given directly. He came to the records office doorway 20 minutes later. "Corinna," he said. "Yes. She reviewed your position. She intends to." Sarah set down her pen. She doesn't have grounds for termination if the report is accurate. And the report is accurate. He was quiet for a moment. He leaned against the doorframe in the way of someone who had decided to remain in a place rather than passing through it. "No," he said. "She doesn't. She may reclassify the role as redundant," Sarah said. "That's the procedural mechanism available to her. She could. She would need to argue that the functions I'm performing are not necessary to station operations." Sarah looked at him steadily. "I've been keeping a log. Work completed, dates, outcomes, including the patrol gap and the pup recovery." Something moved in his eyes. "Of course you have," he said. "I can have the log formatted as an operational necessity report by tomorrow morning." He was looking at her with that attention again, the deliberate attention that made no pretense of looking at anything else. "She won't move forward with the reclassification," he said. "You can't know that," Sarah said, carefully. "I can." He was matter-of-fact about it, neither apologetic nor boastful. "But that's not the point." She waited. "The point," he said, "is that I already read your log. You keep it in the 3rd drawer, left side." She looked at him. "You went through my desk. I was looking for the spare copies of the patrol maps." He said it with such complete composure that it took her a moment to understand that he was not, in fact, entirely sorry. "Your log was on top of the maps." "I see," she said. "You have documented 312 distinct contributions to station operations in 2 years," he said, not as a justification, just as a record. She had not thought of it as 312. She had thought of it as the work, and the work was what it was. "I wasn't building a case," she said. "I keep records." "I know." He was very still in the doorway. She understood that the stillness was the same kind she had noticed in him from the beginning. Not in action, but the quality of a man holding a great deal in place, through will alone. "Corinna will complete her review," he said. "I will not interfere with that. It's her process." He paused. "But I want you to understand something." She looked at him. "I am not keeping you here because the pups are attached to you," he said, "or because you have 312 entries in a log, or because Corinna cannot find the grounds to move you." He set his hands in his pockets and looked at her from across the desk with an attention so particular, so deliberate, that it had nothing in it of category or classification. "I am asking you to stay because I am choosing to, because I want you here, because when I walked in 3 days ago, and you were standing in the firelight with my son, attempting to unlace your boot, you looked up at me without performing anything, and I had not seen that in a very long time." She took a breath. It was not a small thing he had said. She understood that. She was practical, but she was not so practical that she could reduce it. He had said it plainly, in the way that people say things when they have decided to stop not saying them, and he had said it with the specific weight of someone who does not offer what he had just offered easily or often. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You called him your son." Something crossed his face. "He is." She thought about the dark little face looking up at her in the hollow, with eyes that were more blue than amber, and the determined waddling across the floor every morning, and she thought about the pup who slept best when she was in the room, and she did not yet fully understand what it meant that she felt. Hearing that, something warm and enormous in her chest, that was not a small thing at all. "I'll stay," she said. He nodded. It was the same nod as before, but different, more internal, quieter. The nod of a man who has been holding a breath for some time, and has now, carefully, let it go. "Don't go anywhere," he said. She understood, this time, what he meant. There was a week between that conversation and the next step, and then a month. And the month had in it a great many mornings at the records table, and evenings with the pups and long terrain walks where he pointed out features of the ridge sector, and she pointed out the places the patrol routes missed, and they talked about logistics and coverage patterns and the records office reorganization, and never quite about anything else. And yet the anything else was present in every conversation, between the lines, in the particular quality of his attention when she spoke, and the particular quality of her composure when he was very near. Corinna completed her review. She filed a report acknowledging that the support Omega position at Ashvale had demonstrated operational necessity, and she reclassified it accordingly, and she did not contact Sarah directly, but sent the documentation through the standard channel. It arrived on a Thursday. Sarah filed it in the appropriate folder and continued with the day's work. The pups were named in a ceremony she was not invited to attend, but she heard the names called from the main room, and she understood that one of them was given a name that meant, in the old language she had found referenced 3 times in the border records, the one who was found, the black one. She had learned by then that his name in the human tongue was Finn, and Finn had developed a recent habit of bringing her things, small objects, a pine cone, the corner of a blanket, the pen she was looking for, and depositing them at her feet with the solemn ceremony of something presenting offerings. Calder, watching this one morning, said, "He has decided. He's very young to be deciding things," she said. "They decide early," Calder said. "It's the certainty of not yet knowing enough to doubt." She looked at him. He was looking at Finn with an expression she had catalogued by then without trying to. The expression he carried when he thought no one was watching, which was the particular expression of a man who has something he is still learning to call what it is. "You should come to the spring council meeting," he said, without looking away from the pup. "I'm support staff," she said. "You're the person who knows these records better than anyone in the territory." He paused. "And I am asking you to come." She weighed it. "All right," she said. That was in late January. The The spring council was 6 weeks away. She went back to work. Spring came the way it always does in the high country, not kindly, and not quickly, but in stages, one morning at a time, the snow retreating a little each week, until what had been white became grey, and then, very slowly, the pale gold of last year's grasses returning to themselves. The path between the station and the lower ridge cleared enough by March to be passable, without snowshoes, and she went back to the hollow once, on a quiet afternoon, and stood where the roots of the big spruce were, and looked at the space that was smaller than she remembered, and thought nothing very complete about it, just that it was a place she had been once, and that it had mattered. Calder was with her. He had been there on the ridge above, doing a survey, and had come down when he saw her heading toward the hollow, without asking where she was going. They stood together for a moment in the space under the spruce. They were this far inside, she said, indicating with her hand. He looked at the space. He was quiet for a long time. "I didn't know," he said, finally, "about the gap in the patrol coverage. I should have." "You know now," she said. "It nearly—" He stopped. "But it didn't," she said. He looked at her. She held his look. She was, by this point, quite accustomed to holding his look. "No," he said. "It didn't." He did not reach for her then. He had been careful. In the weeks between the conversation in the records office and this moment, to be careful, to let the space between them mean what it meant without pressing it faster than it would go, which she had noticed, and for which she had a quiet gratitude she had not expressed, and he had not asked her to express. He was a patient man, in the particular way of men who have learned, across a long time, that patience is not the same as waiting. He turned, and they walked back up, out of the hollow and along the ridge, and the wind was from the south now, and it had warmth in it, and she pulled her coat open a little, because she didn't need it as much as she had. The spring council was in the second week of April, in the large hall at the territory seat, and she came in beside him, and the room was full of wolves in the arrangement of a political gathering, which was to say it was a careful arrangement, and everyone in it knew what everyone else's presence meant. She was support staff in a room that had no category for support staff at council meetings, and she understood that some eyes in the room could not quite locate a classification for what she was, and that this was something she would simply have to weather. She sat where the records were, at the table to the right of the main floor, and she opened her files, and she worked. She was there as a resource. She had brought 4 years of patrol records, and a corrected coverage map, and a cross-reference summary that she had completed in the week before the meeting, and which she was confident was the most accurate account of northern border operations currently in existence. When the coverage gap came up in the discussion, and it came up early, because he had put it on the agenda, he said, "The account that follows is derived from the operational analysis prepared by Sarah, who manages the Asheville station records." She had not expected to be named. She had prepared the documents to be cited without attribution, because attribution was not the point. She looked up briefly. He was looking at the room, not at her. The room turned to look at her. She met the room. Something happened in it. Not immediately, not with drama, not with any of the spectacular visibility that a story of this kind might be expected to produce. It was quieter than that, and slower, and she was perhaps the last person in the room to notice it happening. A wolf across the table, who had not acknowledged her presence, moved his chair a fraction. A woman near the door, who had been examining the ceiling, shifted her focus to the records table. The quality of the air was different in the way she now understood it could be different, not because of anything she had done or said in that moment, but because of something that was being read in the room's own mechanisms, something she could not read herself, but could see the effect of, like wind visible only in the movement of what it touches. She went back to her files. She was not going to make anything of it. She was going to do the work. When the meeting closed, he walked with her out of the hall and into the April evening, and the light was long and amber, and the kind of late-day light that makes everything look as if it has just been decided. You could have told me. She said, that you were going to name me in there. You would have argued for anonymity, he said. Yes, and you would have been wrong. He was not unkind about it, simply accurate. She considered this. Possibly, she said. They walked a little way in the evening light. The pups are at the station, she said. We should get back. We should, he agreed. They walked back. That was how it was, with them, not declarations delivered in dramatic moments, but the ordinary continuity of two people who had decided, without ever quite saying so, that back meant the same place. The summer came, and then it was simply theirs, the station, the records, the pups growing into something between awkward and marvelous, Finn still presenting her with small objects, Calder arriving in the records office at the end of each day to go through the patrol summaries with her, staying longer than the summaries required, leaving when the fire had burned down, and then not leaving, and then eventually the not leaving becoming the arrangement, unremarked and unannounced, the way the best arrangements always become. She kept the old tin of wax on the windowsill of the records office, the tin whose label was long gone, found in the back of a shelf behind crates no one else had moved. She had good wax now, a proper container, efficient and new. There was no practical reason to keep the old tin. She kept it. The morning she thought of afterward, not because it was remarkable, but because of everything it was not, was a morning in early summer, the window open to let in the sound of the ridge and the smell of the pines, warming in the sun, Finn asleep on the mat near the door, with the boneless confidence of something that has identified where it belongs and simply lain down there, Calder's coat on the back of the second chair, because that was where it lived now. She sat at the records desk with her tea and her logs, and the light came in through the window and lay across the table and across her hands, amber and warm, and outside the ridge was beginning its day, and inside the station was quiet, with the particular quiet of things settled. It was not remarkable. It was simply the morning, and the morning was hers, and it was everything. Would you have walked 3 miles in that storm, not knowing what waited on the other side? Let me know in the comments below.